Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Lost Airfields of Oxfordshire. Now in today's video we are in the lovely village of Grove, located just next to the town of Wantage. And we are going to be taking a dive into the history of what was once RAF Grove. Now this was an absolutely huge airfield. At its peak it covered over 1,000 acres. It was one of the busiest airfields in Europe during World War II. And then, once we've gone through the airfield's long and varied history, we'll be talking to a gentleman called Adrian, whose uncle actually served here at Grove. And then we're going to go for a little explore and try and find everything that remains of the airfield's history. So without further ado, my name is Tom Hutt and welcome to Oxfordshire Uncovered. So Grove's history begins in the late 1930s. Germany was expanding at an alarming rate and the British knew something was coming, so they started to plan. Now part of these plans was to expand the RAF. That included improving the current RAF bases and most importantly building new ones. Now one particular site chosen for a new airfield was here at Grove. Now from what I read, it wasn't actually the best choice. But it was very flat ground and it was also perfectly located next to other RAF bases for support, which was a requirement when building airfields at the time. Now after a lot of back and forth meetings and debates and disagreements, all to do with if they should build here or not build here, it was actually finally agreed to build here, with construction officially starting in May 1941. It was designed to have 3 runways, with the main one being roughly 6,000 foot in length, and the 2 smaller ones, one being roughly 4,000 foot long and the other 3,000 foot long. Now the way these runways were built and laid out was actually really clever. You'll be able to see in this aerial photo that they actually form a series of triangles. Now that was a very clever design, because in the event of a bombing, the triangle would basically spread out any bombs so they couldn't hit all 3 at once. Now another part of the construction included the hard standing areas for planes to park, which there is one down the road. Grove actually had 54 hard standing areas for plane parking. Yeah, there is one down there, so we'll try and show you that a little bit later on. Now as well as the hard standing parking, there are 2 T2 type hangars built again. One still stands today, which is actually what's behind me here. The airfield was in use by 1942 and its first occupants were the 15th Operational Training Unit. Now they used Grove as a satellite for their home base of RAF Harwell. Now they would have used Grove to practice night flying manoeuvres in their Vickers Wellington twin-engined bombers. Now there was also a few bombing practice ranges in the area. I think there was one at near Drayton, one up near Ven Mill somewhere. Now a bit later on, RAF Grove was commandeered to train glider pilots. Now the gliders they would have flown at Grove were really smaller and lighter ones, just so they could get used to the controlling and handling of them. And then during their final stage of their training, they would have actually been sent just up the road to RAF Bryce Norton to be trained on the heavy gliders at the Heavy Glider Conversion Unit, or the HGCU for short. But there was a problem at Bryce. Their runways were only grass, and with the ever increasing activity and some really bad weather, it really ruined their landing strips. So the decision was actually made to lay concrete runways at Bryce. So while that was all being done there, the Heavy Glider Conversion Unit actually had to find a temporary new home. And that of course was going to be here at RAF Grove. Now the new runways at Bryce were soon finished and the HGCU moved back home. But now there was no rest at Grove. Soon after the HGCU left Grove, 3 squadrons, the 132nd, the 174th and the 184th, commandeered the airfield, bringing with them their mighty Hawker Typhoons. Now this was for a 3-day military exercise called Spartan. This was a really huge exercise, but I won't cover the story of that in this video as it would take far too long to cover it. Now I'll provide a link below for some more information on the subject. So after this exercise took place, RAF Grove was temporarily commandeered to RAF's number 15 Advanced Flying Unit. That again was another training unit, with their main craft of choice being the twin-engine Airspeed Oxford. But they eventually left Grove and moved to RAF Membury. Now from what I can find out, that was actually the last RAF use for the runway for a long time, as its new owners were ready to move in. So the USAAF arrived on the 27th of July. Then RAF Grove was officially taken over and renamed USAAF Station 519. Now it didn't take long for them to start making changes. They soon built a storage and engineering site for the 9th USAAF Service Group on the east side of the site. They also built accommodation to serve the 7,000 plus servicemen who would have actually lived here. They even built sewage plants, a water tower. Well, that's long gone now, but I'm sure I have seen a photo of it. It was located on the main street of Grove. I'll put it on the screen now if I have managed to find the photo. They also added more electricity infrastructure. And I've even read that they even built 2 pubs on site. Now that was actually really rare, as nearly all of the US airfields were dry sites, except for the officers' mess, of course. Now the USAAF's expansion was absolutely huge. At its peak, it stretched all the way up to near the Williams F1 team, which is located on the station road. Now that part of the site was actually a vehicle repair depot, and then it also stretched the other way as far as Challow, just roughly behind where Mellor's garage is on the Farringdon Road. That area there was actually the entrance for anything being delivered by the road. Now I'll put 2 photos on the screen now. The one on the left is from 1942 and the one on the right is from 1946. You can really see how much it has expanded. I've actually put arrows on the one on the right of stuff that has been built. Not only stuff that's been built, there is also areas on the 1942 photo that now don't exist in the later photo. So please feel free to actually just pause the video and take a look at the two. It is a really good comparison. Now on August the 4th, the airfield had its first official occupants, the 45th Air Depot Group, ADG for short. Not long after the airfield was officially designated Number 3 Tactical Air Depot, 9th USAAF Service Command. Now their main role was to repair and modify planes. That was mainly Havocs and Northrop P-61 Black Widows. There would have also been B-25 Mitchells and B-26 and Marauder bombers being repaired, maintained and modified here. The 45th ADG was later joined by the 43rd ADG. They carried out very similar jobs, but they weren't just repairing and maintaining planes. They would have had so many different jobs to keep themselves busy. But the work did not stop here for Grove, and the USAAF next major role came in October 1943. It became the home of the 31st Transport Group. Now the 31st Transport Group was mainly being used to transport personnel and cargo all across the other USAAF air bases in the UK. Now the main aircraft was the Douglas C-47 Skytrain. But once D-Day had successfully taken place, the 31st Transport Group actually became one of the main ferry services to and from France. They carried everything from cargo, personnel, and they even were used as an ambulance service. So the 31st Transport Group actually served here until September 1944, when they would soon move to France to be closer to where all the action was. Now you can see why they say Grove was one of the busiest airfields in Europe during the war. There was so much activity happening all at one time, but it didn't actually take long for it to start to die down. Now, the very last use for the USAAF at Grove actually came in October 1945, when the 3rd Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron occupied the airfield, before they returned to the States later in that same year. And its final American occupant was the 36th Bombardment Squadron. They were originally based at RAF Alconbury, which I've probably mispronounced. But they actually closed there, so they had to find a temporary home at Grove. They also returned to the United States in December 1945. Now that was actually the end for the United States Air Force here at Grove. The RAF took the airfield back in 1946, and the site was mainly used to scrap all the surplus aircraft left after the war. Then the very last RAF occupant was the 431st Equipment Depot, who were originally based in Hamburg but then moved to Grove. And then that was it for the last RAF use for this airfield. The last proper use for this place was the Atomic Energy Authority. They owned large parts of the airfield, and I'm sure they had houses here as well. That's from 1955 onwards. But that was all sold right near the end there, sort of late 1950s. And that is how we actually see it now. It is being sold for housing. All the fields are going. The main big housing estate being built now is the Wellington Gate estate, of course named after the Wellington plane. There's all these fields here as well, which are going to be eventually converted to housing, which is of course why we're here today, because before you know it, all this will be gone and the airfield's history will be lost. So yeah, that is why we're here. So that is actually it now for a history of RAF Grove and USAAF Grove. So now we've had a look at like a brief history of the RAF Grove and USAAF Grove. Like I said, it's only a brief history, because if we didn't do it briefly, it would go on for hours. There is so much to look into. I'll actually put a few really good links in the description for you if you want to continue looking more into the in-depth history of RAF Grove. There's a free book which is really good. There's a few other sort of small articles about it which I will put links to in the description. So now we've had a look at that sort of brief history, we're now going to talk to a gentleman called Adrian. Now he's got an amazing story to tell from his uncle, who actually served here at USAAF Grove. So we've caught up with Adrian via Zoom, so we're going to have a quick meeting with him, and then after that we'll be taking an exploration of what is actually left of RAF Grove. So now, without further ado, let's head over to speak to Adrian. Okay, so welcome Adrian to the channel. I'd just like to thank you already for all your support in this video.
That's all right. That's okay.
Just trying to get my head around some of all this history is crazy.
There's a lot to it. There is a lot to it.
Yeah, and then sort of all these US squadron names and numbers.
Yeah.
It just baffles your head.
It's rather, yeah, even me, it's like been doing my head in for a few years now.
So how did you first sort of get it? I guess you were always into military history.
Yeah, ever since a young age, I was really into military history, and then just went from there. And then listening to the stories from my nan and my granddad about, you know, family members and things like that, it just took over. So I do it for a job now as well. So I work for a company that supplies reenactors and stuff.
Cool.
So I've been a reenactor myself for nearly 15 years. So yeah, it's just taken over my life really. I do it for a day job and I do it for a hobby. So
yeah, that's good. So I've done quite a few videos now on this channel with World War II. I'm trying to like do other videos, but so much of Oxfordshire's history is World War II. It's difficult to avoid it, but it's good. It's very it's a very interesting subject to look into.
Yeah, especially with the history of what Oxford was. It was more of a training sites, transport and supply, which we obviously will go into, but it's not so much the heavy combat side of things. It's more of the, things like Cowley, for example, repairing the aircraft and getting them back going again, So there's a lot more of an interesting history that isn't really talked about in the books as such.
Yes, yeah. That's always sort of the history I like, is the hidden history.
Yeah, exactly. It's also, when you look into these side of things, you start finding out the more human side and the impact it had on the locals and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So let's sort of into the main subject, really. So your uncle served at Grove.
Yeah. So obviously I understand that you're doing an episode on Grove Airfield.
Yes.
That's how we got in touch with each other. Basically Grove is a massive passion of mine. I grew up in Oxford myself. I live in Aberystwyth now for my sins, so I live in West Wales, but I moved here about 10 years ago. But obviously growing up in Oxford and stuff, it was all around me, and as I said about my interest in history, it kind of took over. So yeah, I always knew that my grandfather had 3 older brothers. One was in the army, one was in the RAF, and one was in the Fleet Air Arm. And his older sister, I knew, married an American, and I heard all these little stories growing up about how he was a pilot and everything like this. So he's actually my great uncle. He was an American, born in 1920, and he was born in, I've just got a few notes here, he was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then he grew up on like the outskirts of Chicago and things like this. He was in that area. Chicago's actually where he enlisted. He was 21 when he joined, so he was young in our terms, but he was probably an old man judging by the majority of people that were fighting back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've managed to get hold of copies. So I got in touch with his daughter Sandy, who lives in the States, my cousin effectively, and luckily she's got all his records that he kept. She's got his flight suit, she's got his flying boots, she's got his pilot's wings, she's got everything.
Wow.
So we're quite fortunate in that case, because I think there was a big fire in the 70s in their archives which lost loads of the records.
Yeah.
So he also kept a war diary. And that's what I've been recently trying to transcribe into more legible writing and stuff, because it's really old cursive, writing. But so I've basically got the story of him from his enlistment, which was in Chicago. He then signed up for the Army Air Corps, which it was at the time, and he went to Texas for basic flight training. He learned how, the principles of flight, how to go into the military way of things. And then he eventually moved on to other flying things. There is 1 year, there's a big chunk of the diary that's missing, and we don't know why. But from what I can gather, he then went on to train onto transport aircraft. And so his primary aircraft, as it was the C-47, the Skytrain. So yeah, that was his thing. I've actually got a photo of him, which I'll send you a copy of. It's him, I believe it's stateside, stood next to a C-47.
Oh, wow.
And that C-47 is actually still in existence, and it's in New Mexico at the moment.
Oh, wow.
So I managed to track it all down, and I found the owners of it and stuff. And yeah, it's in their museum, so it's still in existence, that aircraft, which is quite cool.
Would you plan to go see it?
Oh, I'd love to. I really would, but I don't do heat very well, so I'm not sure if I'd make it to New Mexico without dissolving. But yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to go out there and have a look around it, because obviously there is a reason why he stood next to that particular aircraft. Whether that was the one that he did some of his initial flight training on, the C-47, I don't know. But like I say, I've got the training. I've got his diary from the start of his flight training up until he then graduates and goes to your advanced flight training. And then his actual final flight training and graduation, unfortunately, I don't have those bits, so I don't know where he did his final bits of training.
Yeah.
Through photos and stuff that I have, I've worked out that, because luckily on some of the back of the photos, he's written down where it was and when it was, you know?
Yeah.
So it looks like he took the northern route to the UK. So he's gone to Goose Bay in Canada, and then what they do is they flew across Greenland, Iceland, and then to the UK. That was the northern route. What he actually did, though, is he landed up going down to Egypt. He was in Cairo, and I've got a great photo of him on the back of a camel with his desert stuff on, right next to the pyramids.
That's cool.
So yeah, it's quite cool. What it was is, so he mentions the 316th, and I know that there was a 316th troop carrier group that was out there. This is something that I'll come to define in a bit. But the troop carrier guys were the guys that you see in like Band of Brothers dropping the paratroopers and stuff, whereas the transport guys that were at Grove didn't do that. They would have been trained, because initially they would have been parts of troop carrier groups and stuff, but they were more mail, supplies, ammunition, things like this, moving it left, right and centre.
Yeah, like a flying lorry service, basically.
Basically, yeah, really, really interesting bit of history that no one talks about, because it's not the combat side of things, you know. So he goes to Cairo, and then I've got in his diary him. Basically, this is the time period that they decided, right, we need to set up a transport service for both the 8th and the 9th Army Air Forces. So it's purely just supply chains for those Army Air Forces in the UK. Yeah. So you have then the 27th is set up to support the 8th Air Force, and the 31st, which is what my uncle became part of, was to supply the 9th Air Force, so the Tactical Air Force. He then flies the aircraft from Cairo to Marrakesh, and he comes round Spain, comes up to the UK, and goes to Grove. And that's when he was one of the first initial guys there who began the transport operations. Wow. Yeah.
quite a long flight as well, that, isn't it?
It is a bit of a trek, yeah. He even mentions, like, he's following in his aircraft, he's following the CO in another aircraft. So yeah, he was really one of the first guys that would have gone to Grove. Saying that, when he gets to England, he come down sick. And he landed up getting jaundice. So his first few bits in his diary about him getting to Britain, he lands up in the Churchill Hospital in Oxford, which was obviously set up for American servicemen.
Yeah.
If you go there today, you can see the Stars and Stripes outside the front of the hospital. So he landed up there for a bit, and then yeah, it's a real typical what do you call it? Like I can't think of the word, with all the bureaucracy of the way that the army works. So he gets discharged from hospital, which is the Churchill. He then gets sent to a recruit replacement depot, which means he has to go all the way up to Rugby. Then he goes to Chorley, I think, and then he gets sent somewhere else just to get back to Grove. So yeah, he writes about how miserable it was just getting in all these trucks and hitching lifts just to get up to the north, just to come all the way back down the road from where he was anyway. Yeah. And then that is when he continues, and he becomes a pilot with the 314th Transport Squadron at Grove. So with the 31st Transport Group. So they had a number of squadrons, 313th, 314th. I can't remember exactly. There was the medical evacuation things, the squadrons that were with them as well. And he was one of those guys. So that's how he landed up starting the war, effectively, in the European theatre. Yeah.
It's amazing how we actually won the war sometimes. When you look at all these problems,
yeah,
the back end problems where it's disagreements and
yeah,
you do this, you do that. Oh, you need to do that.
Yeah, he he
anything.
yeah, he mentions about how miserable the weather was as well, obviously. So he's just come from Cairo and he's landed up in Muddy Grove, so it's a bit of a difference.
I remember I read that book that you sent me a link for, and a lot of the stories from that mention how muddy it was.
Oh yeah, horrendous. Yeah, it was when they started building the new housing estate, the Wellington Gate, which I'll talk about later on. That my first thought was, have they thought about how miserable it gets at Grove? I hope the infrastructure is a bit better, because otherwise nothing's changed from 80 years ago.
No, it was when I read the little bit that said I was in charge of digging a hole and my mate was in charge of bailing the water out of the hole at the same time.
Yeah, it was really, really bad, and loads of the locals would say about how all the mud was getting churned up by all the trucks going in and out. And of course, it was a busy hub. It was, I think, at one point, it was the busiest airfield in Europe, and it was the second busiest in the world after the hub in the China, Burma, India theatre. So yeah, it was that busy, and this is why I'm so passionate about it. Not only because my family link, but because Grove has gone largely under the radar.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, I don't know whether it's the fact that it's not the combat missions and things like this that it doesn't get the sort of glory. But without somewhere like Grove, we would have struggled to win the war.
Yeah. So when I started doing the research for the video, before sort of I found that book and stuff, there is like 4 paragraphs on Wikipedia about the history, but it deserves so much more than 4 paragraphs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important place, and you know, I think even with all my time being the reenactor and looking into these things and stuff, you find very, very little on that airfield. And you're just like, this was the second busiest airfield in the world at one point, and it's just in a little tiny corner of Wantage, you know. It's just, you know, so yeah, that was the passion, really. It's just taken over. So yeah, I've you know, from that point, like I said, I go through the war diary. You get lots of interesting excerpts from him and things like this, and just daily life, really. You know, even him putting down listening to Bob Hope. You know, this is what I mean. It's the human side of it that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And it's funny. There's a bit where he's complaining about I can't remember his name. It was his commanding officer. So his commanding officer was, I'll have to find his name. But he basically thought that the guys were getting a bit cocky, with, you know, thinking that they were the big fly boys.
Yeah.
So his CO actually requests Dell go for a check ride. So basically, I'm going to come and sit in the back and see how good a pilot you actually are. And my uncle Dell complained about this, and in his diary, he's like, you know, who does this guy think he is? And it turns out that pre-war, their CO was an actual C-47, well, a DC-3 pilot for one of the American airlines, and had 5,000 hours on the aircraft. So he was just like, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
But the very next day, he does get his own back, and he writes this really interesting thing that he says, I had the CO in the back with some other guys. Dell takes off from the main runway at Grove and immediately turns one of the engines off and flies it on one engine, circles the airfield and lands it, and they're like, yeah, you're fine. So yeah, he passed that check ride.
The diary sounds really good. I'm sure did you mention to me you might be like potentially making it into a book?
Yeah, I'm basically, it's not going to be like a big published one. It's just purely writing down all the stories that I've heard from family members, from what I've researched, people who I've contacted and stuff, and then just having information showing the diary entry, what it's saying, and things like this, you know.
Yeah.
And like I've said already, it's the big bit about the human side of war. The interesting thing is at the start of the diary, he's very gung-ho and, you know, I can't wait to get over there sort of thing, you know, and he's learning how to fly and, you know, we'll get them. And then you see a gradual shift throughout the book. throughout his diary, and the more missions he does, you can see it's taking its toll on him. So he's, bearing in mind, again, another thing, the guys at Grove were so busy, you know, the transport squadron. I've got to give a shout out to my friend John Maguire. He's a massive help throughout all my research. He's an author, and his dad flew with the 27th Transport Group, but his dad flew from Grove as well. So he's written lots of books on this subject, and he's helped me so much with this. He informed me about some of the things that was going on. He said, to be honest, because he used to go to the reunions, and he said half the time the guys didn't even know what unit they were in. They didn't know what squadron they were in. They didn't know, you know, that obviously with the 8th and 9th Air Force, you have the 8 or the 9 on your shoulder to denote which one you were. And he said half of them didn't even know what they were in. They would just wear what everyone else was wearing and hope it was right. You know? And these are the Americans that you think are all prim and proper in their nice shiny uniforms, but they were just winging it, you know. I say that, then there's lots of photos of my uncle, again I'll send you, where his shirt's undone, his tie's hanging off, and he looks generally very scruffy, but he's a cool guy, you know. So yeah, going back to the diary, you see this shift. The first real shift you see is he lands at Omaha Beach, or just behind it, on the forward landing strip that they built. I think it was 12 days after D-Day. There's actually footage from that. I'll send you the link, but there is actually footage on YouTube of that archive footage of that day, and they're offloading jeeps and things like this. And he writes in his diary that he landed at Omaha Beach and he was only something like 8 miles from the enemy, and whilst he was waiting for 24 wounded soldiers to be put on board, because that was obviously another job that they did, they would evacuate the wounded out, bring in supplies, evacuate wounded out, you know. And he said, we went down to the beach and we saw 1,500 bodies, I think, being buried, and he said 1,100 of them were Americans. And he says it really puts it into perspective how little your troubles are, is what it's like his quote from that. And it's like suddenly you start seeing this shift, you know. And then gradually, one of his last entries was he goes to Borkenwald concentration camp and saw obviously what was there. That is something that I've heard from his daughter Sandy, that never left him, never ever left him, seeing those things. And you could just read from the diary entries, just like, how can humans do this to one another, you know? And then the very next entry that he writes in there was he goes to a crash site. And what had happened is, so the 31st Transport Group, they used both C-47s primarily, but they also had a number of C-46 Curtiss Commandos. If you look at them, they're basically fat versions of the C-47, but they were really unreliable. And I think the 31st, from recollections, they got assigned 3, and all 3 crashed. And what had happened on this one is it was flying back over towards Paris with 40 odd wounded on board. I think there was 44 crew, and it sprung an oil leak and blew up over a village in France. Now, at that time, my Uncle Dale was the flight lead commander, so he was I think he was the B flight lead of this squadron, and he had to go to the crash site, and he found his best friend, First Lieutenant, sorry, I've got to use American terminology. First Lieutenant Rex Pond. He found his body in a tree.
Oh, God.
And that was his best mate. And he writes about it. And from that point on, there's nothing. And he's just like, he says in that, what happens to a man before they die that turns their hair white? And it's quite sad, really, because you just see it like he's just had enough.
Yeah.
And then the very next entry is him getting on the Queen Mary to go home. So he just didn't write after that. He was just like, right, we're going home. The sad thing is that crash was 2 weeks after the E-Day. So 2 weeks after the end of the war in Europe. People forget it wasn't just a case of, oh, let's all go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a case of they're trying to move these wounded out, and boom, it just blew up, and he goes and finds his mate dead in a tree. You know, so yeah, it's that human side of it that shows what happens. You know, and then of course you got the love story between him and my grandfather's sister, which is quite sweet as well. So yeah.
There's happiness towards the end.
yeah, certainly. I mean, if you want me to go into it about the thing with him and Barbara, how they met and everything.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yes, so my grandfather's sister, Barbara, very, very pretty woman. She was a hairdresser, and she was quite glamorous for that era. You'll see by the different hairstyles she has in the photos. She had gone out for a dance at Carfax in Oxford.
Yeah.
And she had gone with her best friend. And the story goes that it was not long after he had come from overseas, and he got some leave, and he went to the Carfax dance rooms, and apparently the doors opened and there was all these Americans stood there in all their glitz and glam.
Yeah.
And straight away Barbara's best friend saw my Uncle Dan and went, oh, I like him. But he saw Barbara and that was it. He was like, I want her, you know. So they started dating and stuff. And my grandfather, who was a young boy during the war, he was only about 5, he was about 6, I think. Maybe, 6 to 8, I think it was his age around then. He recalls like Dell coming home on leave and visiting the family. They used to live off Cowley Road in Oxford. And he would turn up with loads of sweets and things and just give them all to my granddad. And, you know, he'd go and give him a couple of coins and stuff and just go, oh, pop out for a minute. And he'd have some time with my with my auntie, you know. But yeah, they fell in love. And he even writes in his diaries, like, I can't wait to get back to, you know, Oxford and see my little, you know, that blonde thing that I've met, you know. And because obviously Grove isn't that far from Oxford, he used to, every time he came back from a flight, he would circle the house just to let her know that he had got back. So he would fly over Oxford and just circle their house a couple of times and then go and land at Grove just to let her know that he got back.
Wow, that is pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, and the funny story is, so quite a few years ago, my cousin Sandy, his daughter, came over, and I took her around to my grandfather's house to see him, and he went, oh, I got a bone to pick with you. And she went, what? And he says, oh, your dad still owes us money. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, during the war there was one occasion when he and a wingman came over. So one thing with the 31st is they weren't primarily just the transport guys. They would fly every single type of aircraft available. So they would be flying, say, a C-47 1 minute, they'd land, get out, and then they'd be like, see that Mustang over there, that fighter aircraft, can you move it to here? And 9 times out of 10, they'd be like, I've never flown it before. And they'd be like, well, here's the notes, that's the takeoff speed, that's the landing speed, off you go.
Yeah. And
they would go off. That's why it's so dangerous for them, because half the time they didn't know what they were flying. And on this occasion, he had been seconded to a P-38 Lightning squadron. And he came over Oxford with his wingman. They both had these P-38 fighters, and they circled the house. And Grandad remembers everyone going out and watching them. And then out of nowhere, he come screaming down the road with his wingman in tow, that low that they were blowing tiles off of the roofs from the prop wash and stuff. And they caused a bit of damage, and that's what my granddad was referring to when he was like, your dad still owes us money for repairing our roof, you know. So they were just young lads. They were up to no good, you know, but you know, they didn't know whether they were going to be alive the next day, so you can't blame them, I guess.
No. Imagine like trying to do that now with modern day health.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure somewhere someone's doing it. But yeah, they it even got to a point, it's mentioned in my friend John's book, that American authorities during the war actually got that annoyed that they were going to start hanging chains below the Eiffel Tower, because so many guys were trying to fly underneath it.
Oh my gosh.
There is a combat story where one American fighter actually followed a German fighter through the base legs of it. But But they used to, yeah, every time you flew over for Paris, you would see aircraft circling the Eiffel Tower because they all wanted to go. And I can confirm that my Uncle Dow was one of them people. he did do it, but he was always like, don't say anything. So yeah, after the war, he moves back to the US, and a few years later, he had to fly Barbara out because she refused to take the ship because she didn't want to be classed as a GI bride.
Right.
She hated the term. She did not want to be. Whatever you do not call her a GI bride. So a year later or so, he arranged for her to fly out to the States, and they got married in 1946 in New York. So, and then they spent the rest of their lives together. I think Barbara died in 89, late 80s, and I think my Uncle Del passed away in 91. I never got to meet them, unfortunately, which is a shame because I would just love to have heard some of the stories firsthand, you know. So this is all what I've pieced together just through looking through things. But
yeah,
you know, and obviously meeting people along the way. I've met so many great people. There's John. There's countless people. One of the guys that I do want to give a shout out to was Don Summers. He's the guy that wrote that book that I suggested you have a look at about Grove. Remarkable man. He was so passionate about the airfield. He was the guy that knew everything about that airfield.
Yeah.
And we met when I first started down this journey. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but I just remember a little story. I had gone to Grove this one day, and I thought, well, instead of just some random guy walking around the business park, I'll go into the reception, just let them know what I'm doing, just to be polite.
Yeah.
So you walk into the reception. I don't know what it's like there now. So you walk into the reception, and on this side was a picture of Glenn Miller getting out one of the aircraft. This is another thing. They always say that Glenn Miller never actually went to Grove, but there is proof that he did. Yeah. If you read all his stuff, all the books about him, they just say his band went to Grove and he didn't. But he is photographed at Grove, so that is one thing. So you walk in, there's this huge picture of Glenn Miller on this side. On this side is Bob Hope stood on the control tower outside, you know, on the airfield, and he's entertaining the troops. And we walked in, and I said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm just going to go for a walk round. And I said, my uncle used to fly from here, so I just wanted to get some photos. And the girl behind the desk went, oh, you need to meet, I think his name was Steve. He's the guy who used to own the business park years and years and years ago. And she said, oh, you got to meet him because he's really passionate about the history. He's the guy that got the Venom erected as the memorial. That's sadly on the ground now. So he comes running out and he's like, come through to my office. Come through to my office. I was like, okay. So I sit down and he's like, so what's this about your uncle? I said, oh, he was one of the guys that flew from here. And he said, oh, okay. He said, have you got a photo of him? And I went, I don't need one. He said, why? I said, because that's him in the photo behind your desk. And sure enough, the photo that he had behind his desk has my uncle in it looking in the back of a Jeep. And he was just like, no way. He said, we used to run competitions. Like we were running competitions in the Oxford Mail and stuff, trying to find out the people that were in this photo. And I said, yeah, that's my uncle. He's the one looking in through the back of the Jeep. And he was like, I got to get someone on the phone. So he phones up Don Summers. And Don's in the middle of gardening. He's like, I'll be there in 15 minutes. So suddenly this guy comes running in. He's like, oh, let me show you everything. Let me show you. So I spent the whole afternoon. He was running me around the airfield. This is the taxiway. This is the rifle range. This is the, you know, the operations rooms and all this lot. Showed me everything. And yeah, what a remarkable guy. Like without him, Grove would definitely not be on the map. He did so much to actually write that book and research what he did. So big shout out to him because he was a real big influence on this. So
yeah, it's so important to preserve this stuff before it is lost.
Exactly.
Like the video I've done recently, I don't know if you've watched it, the RAF Shellingford one.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally, they were tearing down the buildings 2 days before I filmed some of them.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, you know, it is our history that's going, but on the other hand, I look at the airfields weren't designed to last.
No.
They weren't ever right, these are going to be here forever. So as long as because you look at it, and it's a shame, yes, there's certain bits of the site that are disappearing, but they've not been looked after for years and years and years and years. And there's just a massive amount of space there, which isn't really having much done to it. So although there was a lot of contention over the new Wellington Gate estate being built, it was kind of like, but we can't just keep this area just because it's got some concrete on it without being rude, you know?
Yeah.
You know, as long as you get the memorials in place, you know, keep a bit of the runway, do whatever you can. But I understand there is a need. Well, these things can't last forever, unfortunately, you know, and you can't save everyone. So my argument is like, you know, for some people that think that, say, RAF Scampton's important, well, it is, and every single airfield's important because every single airfield had people on there that lost their lives. But we can't keep everyone. So to me, RAF Grove is more important for me personally than, say, Scampton or, you know, Abingdon, or, you know what I mean? Everyone's got their own personal reasons. So that's why when back in 2012, around that time when they announced that they were going to start building houses, my goal from that point was I'm going to try and get the roads on that new estate named after things to do with the airfield.
Yeah.
And I was I was just hounding the local parish council, the county council, everything. I was hounding them. And I said, look, I'll even come up with the suggestions. Don't worry about it. I'll do everything, but can we please do this? And I'm pleased to say that is the one thing that they did. They actually found it quite interesting. And I've been there a few times since they've started building, and I'm pleased to say that there is now Maya Close, which is named after my Uncle Dale. Wow. So he has his own road now. You've got Maguire Close, which is named after my friend John Maguire's, his dad. That's in honor of his dad because John's obviously helped me a lot and his dad flew from Grove.
Yeah.
There's all various ones. I think there's Alan Close, Bateman Close. They're all to do with the commanding officers of the 31st Transport Group. And then there's also roads like Sentinel Way, I think it is.
I think there's Hanger Close as well.
Hanger Close. They are all the names that I put forward just to make people go, oh yeah, I never knew. And it's interesting because I did the Grove extravaganza last year where I took along a big presentation, and I did like a little stall just explaining about the history and stuff to do with D-Day and, you know, all sorts to do with the airfield.
Yeah.
And I printed off a list of all the road names and what they were, and I got swamped with people from Wellington Gate Estate that were like, we knew it was about something, but I didn't realize it was that. So it was nice to actually give them a bit of, you know. So for anyone that watches this, that's on Maya Close. It's named after my Uncle Dale. So that was really a proud moment for me.
I think you'll be called into action again soon. So looking at expanding the
airfield. Yeah, probably need to come up with a few more names. Yeah. I've got a few lined up. So, but I think I submitted a lot. So they probably got to get through them. So
yeah. It's a good idea though with these new build estates to do stuff like that, because a lot of them are just being built.
Of course,
people have no idea what they're living on.
And that was my thing. Is I see it that yes, it's sad that the history is going, but there's also this need for housing. Either way, whether you like it or not, it's going to be one of them things. Money talks, unfortunately. You know, without getting too political. So we got to do what we can. And my next sort of project that I have mentioned a few times was obviously with the loss of the Venom falling from the pole due to the storm. I would like to try and get a project going where we get another replica aircraft of some sort, maybe something to do with more directly with the airfield from the war. You know, put there as a memorial to make people go, wow, you know. Because there's the memorial at the north end, which is in the cemetery. There's the memorial at the south end of the runway, which is for the 31st Transport Group. But the Venom was the one thing that made everyone go, wow, what was here? So if I can get something in place with the support of locals and whoever, and say, you know, just get an aircraft of something to do with the airfield, just to basically seal that thing and make sure it gets remembered, because it was so important.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of guys that flew from that airfield that never came back. That was the last place that they ever touched Earth, you know, so we owe it to them, really, just to make sure things are remembered, you know. And I'm glad that you're doing that. I honestly, like, it's not because I'm on your channel doing this interview. I am genuinely, the minute I saw you post that you wanted to do a thing about RAF Grove, I was like, right, boom, I'm going to help this guy where I can, because it's something I'm so passionate about. You know, I want it to be remembered, because it's important, you know.
Yeah. And thank you so much for your help.
No, that's fine.
I have been constantly messaging you. Is this right? Is that right?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Like I said, I love talking about it. There's so many different things, you know, what they were doing. I mean, I don't know if you want, I've got a copy of my uncle's air medal citation. So with the air medal, it was awarded for 5 combat flights if you were a combat crew, but he was awarded a air medal for this particular reason, and it gives an example of what the guys at Grove were doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So it basically it tells you how many hours they was flying and things like this, but this shows you my uncle Dal was flying a number of times a day, not just on one flight. It was a number of times. It was from here to there to there to there. He took part in evacuating wounded from Normandy when we had invaded Europe. He was involved in moving the fuel for Patton, so he was involved in the Battle of the Bulge. And then he was involved all the way up throughout the war, moving supplies forward and evacuating wounded back. So in his citation, it says, Captain Meyer, as a pilot of the transport aircraft, unarmed and without fighter protection, flew a total of 518 hours and more than 50 missions into the areas occupied by the 1st, 3rd and 9th Armies in support of the Ardennes, Rhineland and Central European campaigns during the above time period. Time periods mentioned further. These flights were made to temporary airstrips within sight of hostile troops and with ever-present likelihood of enemy air attacks. These dangerous missions of great responsibility required as many as 8 flights a day and contributed immeasurably to the success of supplying troops and evacuating American wounded. Captain Meyer's skill and daring under these hazardous flying conditions reflect great credit on himself and the Army Air Forces. So it shows how, you know, up to 8 flights a day.
Yeah.
And you think takeoff and landing is the most dangerous part of a flight, you know? And they were so blasé about it. Like the guys I've spoken, so I do want to mention Don, I think it was Don, put me in touch with, I said, because he used to go to the reunions as well, and I said to Don, oh, do you know anyone that's still with us? And he said, well, I know this one guy and I've got his email. I went, right. And he said, I don't know if he's still alive, but you can try it, you know? So he gave me this email, and it was for a guy called Ed Tierney. And I sent this email not knowing whether I was going to get a reply or not, but I was basically just explaining, you know, hi, my name's Adrian. I'm the great nephew of Dal Meyer. I don't know if you knew him, but I just wanted some information about what you guys are doing, etc., etc. And I didn't get a reply for a couple of days. And when I finally did, hi, Adrian, great to hear from you, sort of thing. He said, oh, I didn't just know Toggle. I flew with him on a few missions.
Yeah.
And he was actually in the cockpit with my uncle.
Wow.
And I was like, Toggle. And when I spoke to Sandy, my cousin, she was like, Toggle. She said Barbara, her mum, always used to call him Toggle. It was a nickname, but she never knew why.
Right.
And it turned out when I asked Ed what it was about, he said my uncle was the flight instruments instructor on the squadron. So he used to tell all the new guys what the Toggles used to do. So he got the nickname Toggle. And she was just like, I would never have known that, ever. But Ed Turney, yeah, he sent me squadron orders, which had my uncle written on it and him written on it and all this stuff. And he was telling me all this stuff. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years back. He landed at marrying Jean, and Jean was one of the flight nurses that was at Grove. and they flew missions together, and him and her got married after the war, and they both passed away now, sadly. But it was a couple of years ago. I was reading some squadron stuff to do with the unit, and it mentions one of the C-47s that was shot down near Dunkirk due to anti-aircraft fire, and the crew had to bail out and parachute to safety. That was Ed. And he never once mentioned it to me. It's like, you didn't think to once mention you got shot down and you had to, you know, and that's just what they were like, you know, it was just a job, you know. Yeah, exactly. And it blows my mind. Like, we think about these guys as being the greatest generation, heroic, but to them it was just like, oh, it's just another day in the office.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, it's so crucial for these guys who never truly appreciated what they did, because they don't realize how big an issue it was, you know. And so for people at Grove to be remembered is a passion. So
yeah. Well, that's been fantastic. Thank you very much for
no, that's fine. I'll send you a few photos and things.
Yeah.
I will send you the photo of my uncle with Marlena Dietrich at Grove. It was something that Barbara was never happy with him showing people, because she used to get a bit jealous because it was Marlena Dietrich. But yeah, he was really proud of that photo. But yeah, I'll share some photos with you. By all means, you know, just making sure these guys get remembered, you know. So,
yeah,
you know. But yeah, good luck with the whole thing. And I'm, you know, more than happy to support you. Obviously, growing up in Oxford, I've been around a fair few of the sites as well, and I used to actually live in Littlemore, which backed onto Cowley Airfield.
Yeah.
So I did a bit of that. If you do want a little bit of gossip, I have got a little bit of gossip.
Right.
My dad used to work at the factory in Oxford.
Yeah.
And there is talk that there are still 3 midget submarines underneath the car park there.
Right.
They got buried and built over.
Oh.
So, and there's still the underground fuel tanks for the aviation fuel.
Oh.
Because he said he was in his office one day and they came in to check the drains, and they were putting a camera down the drain, and it just fell into this pit underground.
Yeah.
Just as, because obviously it's BMW now, but just as his German director walked in, and he was like, why is there aviation fuel under here? He's like, there was this thing that happened. So yeah, apparently still 3 midget submarines buried underneath the car park, and there's some aviation fuel under there as well. So don't light any cigarettes anywhere near it.
No, we'd get that dug up at some point, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right, I'll be quick here because it's on Crown's land and she's gave me permission just to have a quick video. But yeah, this entire huge bit of car park, which they don't really use anymore, actually was hard standing for one of the plane parking areas. It's this sort of shape here. I'll try and flash up where it is on a map and then show you exactly which one we're stood on. But over there is actually where one of the only bits of runway left is sat on, but annoyingly we can't film there because they've got all the building stuff on it. Yeah, as you can see, this absolutely huge bit comes sort of like a triangle round and then across there. There was another one next to this, but the shape's gone now. But yeah, it's still cool to see. So yeah, this is the first part that's still sort of left that you can clearly see. We'll have a there's more stuff right over that way that we're going to have a look at. But yeah, this is the first stop on our little exploration of what's left of RAF Grove. So let's hop back into the car now and move on to the second place. See you in a minute. Right, so we are now on our next location. Again, I'm not gonna put the exact location on the video because we've had to get permission to come here and film today. So this building is the main operations block. Unfortunately, we can't go inside now. They've boarded it all up, mainly due to the fact that it's full of asbestos and it's not structurally sound anymore. But thanks to Adrian, there is some photos of sort of the inside area which I will put on the video for you now. Yeah, it's absolutely huge, this building. Around this way. But yeah, it's really cool. In there's the actual original mission boards as well. Another little building there. But yeah, this like I said, this is the main operations block. You've got some more sort of smaller buildings here. It's really cool that these buildings still stand, but it is a shame we can't go in, but it's for our safety, so that's actually a really cool little shop we got here. So this building also goes into the operations block. From what I read, this would have actually been like the aircraft briefing room, basically. There's another building here as well. Not sure on the use of that one, but again, I will put some photos of the inside of these buildings. It's really cool. Look, you've got the original window frames. Yeah, look, got the original windows. An original bay window as well by the look of it. My guess though, it might have actually been an entrance or something. And you've got this building here. A few people have told me this building would have been actually a guardhouse for this area of the site. Very cool little building. Yeah, I'm gutted we can't go in it, but it's for our safety. Alright, there's just a couple more things I want to show you down here. This, of course, isn't RAF, it's modern. Right, so these buildings here are actually the toilet block. one on the left, there's one on the right, and another building as well. Again, so I've seen online that the toilet blocks are actually separated, one for officers and higher ranks and then the other one for normal. Wonder what the difference was. Like golden toilet paper in that one. And then literally just over the behind us, we got this cool little thing, which is an original electrical box, I believe. Really cool. Sort of see the big transformers coming out the bottom there. Yeah, this would have been like an electrical substation room, which is a really cool little thing. Right, so that's it for these buildings. I know we haven't seen a lot of it really, but we can't go in a lot of it, so that is a shame. But there is a few more sort of stuff down that way we're going to have a look at in a second, so we'll see you down there in a bit. Bye. Right, so we're at another point of interest. This is a fuse shed, and surprisingly it's still standing. Look at the size of this. Absolutely huge. It's the original concrete floor here, look. So yeah, from what I've read, they would have fused or even defused bombs in this building, ready to go out for a mission. It's getting a bit structurally unsafe though, look at that crack. It's a huge building. Well, we're not that far away from another point of interest, which is literally just over there a little bit, so we'll go have a quick look at that. Right, I can see it over there, but save a bit of time. We'll jump over there now. See you in a second. Right, so here we are at the next point of interest, which is actually part of the sewage works that they purposely built for the airfield. See this huge pipe coming in here, and then it goes into the sewage works there. I can't go in the sewage works, of course, because from my belief it is still active, so it's all fenced off and very secure, so we're not going to go in there. But it's really cool to see something like this still sat here. I think, could I be wrong, but it looks like the original supports are going, basically. It looks like they're subsiding, and then they've put these new ones in instead to support it. Let's follow the pipe. Where does it go? It goes all the way out through the forest now. I'm not going to follow that. But what an amazing bit of history to still see. Right, we're now going to go a little bit further up the road. There's 2 more bits down this end we want to see. Right, I'll see you down there. Right, so we are now here at the very last bit on this actual area we're working at this end. These are 2 what they call blast shelters, which is like another air raid shelter really. But the main difference is these didn't have roofs. They were literally just designed to hop in quickly to protect yourself from a blast, hence the name. But yeah, you can see sort of chamber there, there's a chamber there. Then on the other side you have another entrance with a chamber on that side and a chamber on that side. But this is the first time I've actually seen one of these. I've looked them up before and it's always baffled me, but yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's really cool. And then there's literally one next to it. Oh. This one's a bit more overgrown. See it just in here. Chamber there, look. Chamber that. Yeah, I would have definitely preferred to be in a Stanton shelter than a blast shelter. Any day of the week. But yeah, so that's it for those 2 blast shelters. To the best of my knowledge, these are the only 2 left of RAF Grove, basically. Right, so that is it for this particular area we're looking at now. Let's now move on to the next area. See you in a bit. Right, so our next area we're in, we're not going to say where because it's on private land. We've got permission to be here and we don't want other people coming here. But this guy, this site is roughly on the very far end, sort of shallow end. And this is near where one of the road entrances to the airfield would have been. But he's actually got 3 Stanton shelters, 4 Stanton shelters on his land. This one here is actually sort of semi-buried, not fully buried. But yeah, we did cover Stanton shelters in the last RAF video, which, so yeah, they hold 50 personnel roughly. All sort of pre-built off-site, shipped over and then built like a big Lego set. Usually comes in 18 pieces. Stretches all the way down there, and you've got an escape hatch at the back, which I will just try and show you now. Yeah, this is on private land, so please don't try and find this one. It's not very rare you see them with the escape hatch still on it, so we're very lucky. Well, it's not the original escape hatch, as you can just about see. It's just a bit of corrugated sheet with a brick over it. Yeah, no, this one's really cool. It's still in an amazing condition for what it is. Right, the next one is just over there, so I'm just going to turn off the camera for a second while we head over there. See you in a second. Right, so this is the second Stanton shelter on the guy's land. He's actually using this one for classic car storage, which is pretty cool. Little van there, I'm not sure what it is, but Yeah, there you go, there's the van a bit better. Good idea if you use this as storage, it's watertight. Again, in really good condition, the Stanton. You can see sort of all the, where it's bolted together like a big Lego set again. It's not as buried though, this one, as the ones at Shellingford were. You can sort of see it is semi-buried. And the escape hatch is sort of broken off the top there. Right, so that's that one. I'll have a quick little peek at this van. Oh wow. I don't know what this is, but it's very tender. Cool, right, let's go on to the third one on this guy's land. Right, this is the third one. Again, it's only slightly buried. We can't show you inside it because he's using it as a shed. Don't blame him. Perfect storage solution. I don't think it is, but could that be the original door? I don't think it is, but if you know, comment below. And then the very last one is this one over here, which is very buried. There's all sorts of like concrete and stuff here where it would have been the original paths. See what I mean? There's all these concrete squares, and this one's really buried. You probably won't be able to actually see much of this one. Yeah, and again, another Stanton. Really cool. It's amazing that he's actually got this much on his land, which is really cool. Right, so that is it for the Stanton shelters on this person's land. Again, there's another bit of nice bit of timber there I just saw. Might again be a part of the original door frame. Right, anyway, so now we've had a look at those ones, we're now actually just going to go up the road, about 5 minutes up the road, where our main set of buildings that we want to look at are located. Sorry for the noise, the tractor's just going past. Right, so see you in a minute at the next location. Bit of that. So we've just come down this original path here, which is all laid out nice and concrete path down here. But this is a mystery area. I don't know if you'll be able to help me solve the clue. We're sort of in a concrete circle. Very large concrete circle. So what do you think? Anti-aircraft gun or some kind of gun on here? Because the path also goes off down that way a little bit, to another sort of concrete area there. But it would make sense, something this big, to have something on here. But yeah, if you know, as normal, if you know, comment below. Alright, on to the next bit. See you in a second. So that is everything left now of RAF Grove. So we've tried to cover as much as possible. We've actually, there's the old firing range which we can't actually get to. It's sort of like a no man's land really, of trying to find permission to get onto that one. So I do know about it, we just haven't been able to film it unfortunately. I'll try and get a photo now on the screen of it for you. But yeah, we have seen so many amazing stuff on this little journey to find out what's left of RAF Grove. It's surprising actually how much is left, considering all the housing that's being built all over the place now. As you can see, it's encroaching onto all this green area here. So hopefully it isn't lost forever. That's why we do these videos, to make sure that it doesn't go forever. So I'd just like to say thank you again to Adrian for the video call. You've been absolutely amazing with this video. You've helped me so much, not only with just that video, but you've also given me loads of information on the hidden history stuff that's left here. I'd also like to thank all the landowners for giving me permission to film. Of course, without that permission, this video would have been impossible. So thank you very much for all your help there. So, thank you very much for watching this video on the RAF Grove and the USAAF Grove as well. If you have liked this video, please smash that like button down below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more Lost Airfields of Oxfordshire footage. We have got quite a few more planned. And we've also got loads of other videos planned this year of all kinds of Oxfordshire history. So please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. So, without further ado, thank you for watching Oxfordshire Uncovered.